So let's just start this again, going through the table. I run the table with a simple question just to spice things up. What does roadmaps mean to you, and what's their role in funding commons and impact? Because we all share a vision that roadmaps are these impactful mechanisms and incredibly helpful to boost cooperation and accelerate impactful science and technology. But we also know that you often describe different categories of roadmaps and different use cases. So I will probably start with Joël. And Joël is the co-founder of 3Box Labs and Ceramic. You can say something about that and kick off with a question about road mapping as well.
Okay, hey everyone, I'm Joel. I've been building this network called Ceramic. You can think of it as a decentralized data ledger for just essentially capturing a lot of reputational data. The way I kind of got involved in this whole research road mapping space is I've been working with a group of people building a project called Coordination Network. And I won't go too much into that but right now, but I think to answer your question around why is road mapping important and what do I find interesting there, I think we have an opportunity now with it that's slightly different from what's been possible before, where in the using the type of technologies we have available to us from kind of the crypto Web3 space, we can actually build tools that are much more collaborative without having to trust intermediaries. And so I think the fact that we can actually collaborate better on a larger scale, whether that's institutions collaborating or actually getting individuals like the civic society collaborating on these research, large research project is really interesting. So I think that's why I'm personally excited about this type of road mapping.
So can you hear me? Yeah. So on the definition side, I would say I would go with a general enough definition. For me, road mapping is a process by which we work very systematically backwards from an outcome. And by outcome, I mean an ambitiously stated action that we want to bring in the world. So we work backwards from that to improve our understanding of all the possible ways of achieving that outcome. In terms of the value that I say, I mean, there are outcomes at different levels. There are system level, sector level, roadmaps, at the system and sector level, and also very technical, lower level, a lot more detailed and refined roadmaps. But I would say overall the value that I see is it focuses the attention of solvers. So kind of roadmaps make salient the work that needs to happen. But also, importantly, I think another feature or value out of the roadmaps is that they create the bounds and the metrics that the community of solvers, it can be inventors, scientists, civil society, they can start optimizing and working towards and trying to solve. So more about attention, I would say.
Good. I can go. So I always describe roadmaps as this two-sided process of knowledge sharing and coordination. They are not two separate phases, but in that process, we have the map and we have the process itself. And to the point that Ben made before and this discussion about the planning or the plans, I see the value on the process, because the moment people are happy enough with the map, they stop updating it, and it usually becomes useless because they are not actionable anymore. So for me, roadmaps are interactive mechanisms through which people engage in a kind of a permissionless discussion. So it's a tool for aligning stakeholders. And by stakeholders in the road mapping process, we have a lot of players. We have researchers, we have funders, we have policymakers, we have the community in general that should be engaged. And talking about different categories of roadmaps, we can have ethical roadmaps. We have a lot of discussion about AI safety. We should be designing the roadmaps for AI safety. There's there's a roadmap to build those AIs. There's a roadmap to define the principles. But are they really different roadmaps, or are they moving pieces of these larger multidimensional roadmaps? And in my dream world, they are kind of a plug and play, like the Lego for roadmaps. But some of the limitations, and we will go back there in a bit, is that people use different languages to say the same thing. Or if we want to break the silos between different fields of science and technology, we need to capture the common language. And sometimes the common language is that in research, they are all scientists and they understand hypotheses and claims and evidence, and hence the importance of discourse graphs. But in a way, looking for the common language often also limits the process, because people are not using that in a natural way. It should be really easy to start road mapping. So it's not, there are a lot of dimensions from infrastructure. What's the infrastructure that enables interoperability and collaborative features? How can we engage people to do road mapping? Who pays for the road mapping process? Because everyone talks about road mapping like this new magic pill that will solve all the coordination problems. But if there's anything I learned from my past experience with student roadmaps within protocol labs, is that everyone wants to consume from roadmaps. A smaller, way smaller fraction of people are willing to produce those roadmaps. So enough of what takes from my side. Let's go with mine now.
Just to respond to that, I don't think it's actually a problem that not many people want to produce them. That seems fine. I don't have much to add on what the value of them are. They're coordination tools. In terms of definition, I think just close your eyes and imagine Google Maps real quick. I think that actually does a very good job, where it is this thing that systematically unlocks technical progress that clearly defines a goal. That's where you want to go. It clearly lays out the possible ways that you can get there, and then it makes arguments for what way you should go and what the steps are that you need to do that.
Okay, to that point, I'm going back to, let me ask the audience, if you think about roadmaps and your experience from using them in practice, how many of you faced the thing that a roadmap is just a huge piece of paper on a PDF? Can I see some hands? Is that actionable? Who in the audience think that's actionable enough to? Is that even a plan? It's just a document, right? So to Ben's point, we all sometimes I describe this as distributed pathfinding. So one problem of road mapping is, how can we quantify and de-risk different solutions? How can you make them actionable? And going back to the proposition of this panel about how roadmaps facilitate impact funding, can even in the process of road mapping, we create some value attribution map of who contributed, who seeded the idea, who instigated others to join, who instigated funders to accelerate the space. So I will follow up this with a question about, what does a roadmap look like to you? Ben gave us this visual aspect. I also agree that if you're talking about a roadmap, I want a roadmap. I want to go from A to B. I want to query the roadmap, because for Ben, he might want to see museums in Paris. For me, I want to go with a faster way from A to B. So when I'm using Google Maps, I have different options to select the best path. And I expect to do the same with roadmaps. And for me, they capture this multi-layer maps with different levels of abstraction, from policies to research to products, and kind of all the links in between. And this often poses a problem of navigation that, again, Google Maps solves pretty well. Curious if any of you think that there's value in the text versus this more visual aspect, or are they even excluding each other?
I kind of just wanted to comment on the Google Maps perspective on a roadmap, because I think it's quite good, but it's also I think it breaks down. So in Google Maps, most of the time you're not actually spending time updating the map, and you're kind of like, you have the map and you get some trajectory to that map. Whereas in what we're talking about here is we're making roadmaps for science or for building technology. And when we do that, we actually are creating a lot of new things, and we're actually changing the landscape potentially like a lot. And so it seems like in this type of environment, we need to have a sort of stronger coupling between what the road mapping is and the kind of underlying representation that we have of the map itself.
So just to be clear, I wasn't actually saying that roadmaps are a thing that you look at and it is a map. I was saying I was using that as an abstract description of the pieces that are in a roadmap.
But I think how we describe and then how we visualize really matters, because it creates different affordances to see different things.
Yeah, definitely. But I was yeah. I just want to make clear that I was speaking abstractly.
But on the maps, I think I really like the spatial metaphor because it's flexible enough and it kind of speaks to the plurality of as a feature of a roadmap. You want to see different development paths, right? But when you go at the lower levels of the roadmap, I think it might look more like a graph, right? Because you have dependencies, you have relationships between sub items. I'm not saying that it visually looks like a graph, but I think the map is too abstract for me too.
I'm going to speak in favor of text, actually. Everybody, like, so I think that, thanks, Evan. What I'm not speaking in favor of is a giant wall of text. I think that there's a lot to be innovative on how you do an overview, but at least for some roadmaps, and at least for the roadmaps that I care about that are actionable, you can't get into the granularity of the things that matter and the considerations and the constraints of the actual work that needs to be done without chunks of text. That's unfortunately just how the world works.
You can grab the mic.
Evan, you are done part of the panel.
I would be, but like that will wish it.
It's
You can.
And any researcher is comfortable with reading some kind of narrative. So going back to this dualism between the visualization and the text and what the roadmap looks like, there's a lot of tools for thought in the space. And for those of you that might not be familiar with the term, it's kind of these note-taking apps where you have text and visualization of your knowledge graph on the side, and you can click it and tag it and navigate it. So you have both sides of the world. So even if we're talking about these visual representations, I would expect that as you start dwelling into specific nodes on that graph, you will always want to have more detail, and you will have more text and queryability and all this kind of stuff.
While I have the microphone, I'd love to ask a question as a follow-up. I agree that it would be really great to have something that was like, that had the affordances and outcomes of Google Maps, not necessarily in like a visual structure. Could be generates reports, but I'd love like I want to build this thing. How do I do this? And it gives you stages, like steps and potential paths, and tells you how much it would cost and things like that. I think everyone here would agree that that would be a really great thing to have. I imagine that all of you would give separate answers to what is the hardest thing to build in getting to that point. And or like, how would you go about it if it's just like, oh, well, it's not that hard. I just need to do this very long list of very costly things. I'd love to hear different people's takes on what it would take to build something that could do that kind of like pathfinding in like through the adjacent possible to the long-term goals of science or engineering.
I think that's an open research question. So Nadia,
and as a meta science entrepreneur, you must have some research agenda that you would start on.
Yeah, Yes, but I don't like that. That's the thing is like I don't want to put. I don't feel comfortable enough about what it ends up looking like to actually put bounds on that.
Well, I don't need bounds. I just want a first step.
Oh, like the first step?
Yeah. What do you think is the most important thing to do to generate that like eventual product capability like for humanity?
Like give people a better process for figuring out what to actually put in there.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that it's almost premature to think about tools.
So it's kind of a protocol for road mapping, kind of a set of guidelines of how you would start road mapping a specific area.
Yeah, exactly. Or just like, a community of practice.
I have a question on that. Actually, you discuss if I understood it right, you're discussing like how a good roadmap would look like for you, but I'm not sure. I'm a bit confused. Like the overall goal for you for a roadmap is to get the important stakeholders together so they have one picture of where they want to go and what might be the possible steps with the assumption you already have. So you just have a list of things that you can work on and come back to later on to see like, okay, did it work out? Didn't it work out? What else do we need to do? That's what you meant with updating, right? So, I mean, this is kind of a basic idea of road mapping, so where you can come back to, right? Yeah, just for my confusion. I was kind of confused because it was
Sounds you nailed it.
That's great. And that's good. And can we go to the next step? Like, how do you use it in your daily practice in your project? Like, if you work on that, like, this is your roadmap. How do you use it? Because in my eyes, like a roadmap is the first thing. That's the easy thing to do, and it's hard enough to get all the stakeholders together and stuff. But what are your best practices to help go from the idea to implementing it step by step?
I can maybe take that question, but before we do, I'm sorry, I wanted to get back to that point. I'm not sure, because I mean, we've experimented with having a schema, like a language to describe things. I don't think that's the main bottleneck in roadmaps. Like you can have systems that understand different ways of describing the same thing. So you don't need to train everyone in your community to use results and hypotheses and all this kind of thing. So I wouldn't say it's a mandatory requirement to have a common schema. What was challenging we tried visual tools, visual mapping, graphing, all sorts of different ways when we were trying to kind of implement those roadmaps. What was really challenging was that no one had, it's a technical of gardening, like to keep it in a live, living document, you need a person or some people to have an overview, like a global picture of the different pieces, and no one has that. Because the more people you include, the different disciplines, it's like really, really hard to have one person doing that. And where we ended up with those experiments is as a kind of an affordance and a way of constructing them, kind of going back to text, we were playing with, have you heard of GitHub's Copilot? Which is like a language model that gives you some prompts. It's a very conversational system. So we ended up with that affordance, having a Copilot for your roadmap, essentially. So you can ask questions. It's very discursive. It also guides you, it prompts you back with some ways to guide you through that process. So it's a little bit more structured, and there are ways of doing that technically. And then we haven't experimented with that yet, but you can think of more collective, like more social versions of multiplayer Copilots.
Yeah, I really like the idea of either automated gardening or tooling for scaling gardening of like the roadmap underlying database.
Going back to your comments, I think I would slightly push back on the idea that road mapping is the starting point, and that this kind of, you do the road mapping to engage with the funders. And I will take it as an opportunity to introduce the value of collective knowledge and building those graphs in a more social way, especially to also update it. And in terms of how we incentivize the creation of roadmaps, the state of the art in terms of roadmaps, like this large coordination system, not just within a team or a closed network of individuals around a specific area of knowledge, but like kind of cross-domain roadmaps, is that often institutions and governments like the European Union pays millions to a subset of individuals that are with their money appointed as experts in the area to build those roadmaps, like these really highly opinionated documents that are classified as the roadmap of European Union for AI. And this is, for me, the problem. The problem is that there are different dimensions. Eirini can even talk about this pyramid better than I can, and how you get people to use a specific technology, or in this case, this coordination mechanism. We have the infrastructure. We need the infrastructure. We need the protocol. We need the schema. But what we need to do is convince people to actually engage in these discussions. So what's the value of engaging in these discussions? And why should we convince the policymakers or government agencies paying for these kind of instruments that the way forward is not to pay for specific individuals, but really leveraging the collective knowledge of the people and the community. And this is something I've been debating myself with, and I think it's the bottleneck is really rallying people around creating the roadmaps. Infrastructure is instrumental, protocol is instrumental. We are failing to convey the value of road mapping itself to the people in general. And by road mapping, I mean, like, we want to go to Mars. We don't need just engineers in the system. We need policymakers. We need physicists. We need economists. We need all kinds of knowledges. And those roadmaps are being created. There are some good examples in the past that we can go back to, like the semiconductor roadmaps. And what we have there is that people came together from different areas. They wanted to solve a specific problem. And they have different paths. And they started the discussion. And they come up with their own metrics to decide what was valuable. So I do, from my experience, as a research program manager, when we are really spinning off new programs, road mappings are this multi-interface with different stakeholders, but usually program managers got to play the god's role because they are kind of controlling the process and building the roadmap as they want. And in terms of making them actionable, they become actionable when we identify the right people to execute on the roadmaps, or we create an investment thesis to convince funders to deploy money for those specific areas, or we even identify biases in research itself, or even the funding mechanisms, because as we start laying the ground, we start seeing a lot of holes on the map. Oh, we are missing here something. And that's how you start figuring out that we need to bring extra people to the space. But building this community of practice, it's challenging. And for me, everything is instrumental to guarantee that kind of community of practice, convincing people to start doing the road mapping and then expanding. That's the bottleneck for roadmap, from my experience.
So just to quickly say how we use it, and I think to argue for the having one person who is making the roadmap happen. So the way that we use roadmaps at Speculative Technologies is in a couple of ways. It be like to the point that they're for a number of different groups. So the first way is literally just to flag the contradictions in our ideas about what needs to happen. Like, you go through and you say, okay, like, we think these are the most important things to work on. And then we write down, okay, here are the biggest risks. And then you look and you say, oh, wait a minute. The things that we thought were the important things to work on don't actually address the risks. So, like, even if we do this work, the most important work, it won't actually address that risk. So then you need to go back. And if you're extremely intellectually honest about what you're doing, then it's this iterative loop while you're creating the roadmap, and just sort of surface, and then getting to a point where you're really confident. It's like, okay, like, this is the most important work because it addresses these risks, and these are the biggest risks because X, Y, Z. And then you use that to find people who are going to do that work. So you say, like, you want to do this. Another is to get community response. Turns out that people are very bad at working on something de novo, but if you show them something and you ask them how it's wrong, right? It's like, I forget whose law it is on the internet. But it's the same thing for roadmaps, where if you say like, yes, we should do this, they'll be like, nope, you should do this other thing. And then finally, for basically showing funders that like, look, we actually are serious about what we're doing, and like, here are the concrete things that we need to do. And then the thing is that doing all of that requires someone to have it in their brain. So back to the point about technology as people, realizing these contradictions really requires you to actually be holding the entire roadmap in your brain. And you can solicit community contribution, but I don't think that you can fully decentralize
The entire roadmap?
Yeah.
Like, it
Good luck to that.
can't it be arbitrarily large? Like,
Well,
so there's gonna be some.
So let's step back. I'm talking about roadmaps for, like, we want to build a prototype of this technology.
So, like, I don't think that there was any individual person who had the entire, like, Saturn V rocket, everything in their head. Like, Werner von Braun, maybe it came close, but, like, most of, like, you can't have subcontractors and have one person who keeps everything in their head.
So
How do you balance
at the level of abstraction that the Saturn V rocket was roadmapped at, where they like, this is well, we haven't talked about like requirements or metrics. The part, like, at the level at which they said, okay, we need someone to build this thing that has these specs, I think that, and that to the point where it could be modularized, I think that a couple of people did have it in their head.
Eirini, can you talk about how you think of modularization and the boundaries between, like, I think I get the impression that you agree that one person can't have a whole thing in their head, and I'd love to hear how you think about the boundaries between.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because at the level of abstraction that you just described, when you have a very clear setup spec, then probably it's all right if there is no main architect behind that. I was more referring to if you want to have a collective knowledge system that, I mean, in our case, we had 20 people using it from different disciplines. Like, there's no one person who can keep track of the solutions and the tactics and the constraints across domains, even within very adjacent ones, like in agriculture and both the agriculture team and the climate team were working on methane, right? So this is what I meant, that not one person can have that in their head, because also there are biases. Like, if you're a biochemist, like, you tend to look at certain things and filter certain things a certain way. So I think we might need certain better systems for debiasing us when we construct and characterize those outcomes, but also coordinate and find interdependencies and loops that we haven't.
I think this is where LLMs becomes really interesting, because you can actually have personalization, and you can ask questions about this, like, roadmap, this artifact, and get back responses like personalized to your expertise. And essentially, like, then every individual gets their own view into this roadmap, and also, like, outputs their roadmap in a kind of maybe like a different format. And it's sort of like up to the computer system to, like, make sure that we can.
Can we have a question from the audience? This gentleman asked me to the mic.
No, just thinking about the roadmaps. We always think like doing roadmaps like from the top, from the origin. And we build the roadmaps from the top to the bottom. Yeah, like the government always did the same. But we are like trying to build technology, but technology technology is like, we're trying to build technology for the people, but I think, I don't know if I am wrong, or like, it's my perspective that people is not involved in the roadmaps construction. And for example, some projects like, we are developing a project that is going to be focused in Africa or in Latam, and nobody asks Africa or Latam people what do they want or what do they need to use the project. Because, okay, you talk with the stakeholders, with the funders, with the VCs, but you never talk with the with the users, with developer users or normal users. So how can we solve this from the beginning? Because maybe we ask the people, but when the project has 1 year developing, but why do not ask the people from the day zero to build the roadmap?
Every time I hear roadmaps and stakeholders being cut down into the stakeholders are the VCs and the funders, I always shrive because, again, I'm failing to convey the message. I agree that roadmaps need to have people involved in them. And going back just a little about if one person has all the roadmap in the head, I think that's where the different categories of roadmaps starting to play a distinct role. Because when we're talking about a roadmap that considers all players in the system, we won't just have researchers, we won't just have policymakers. Let's think about a solution for a specific health problem. We want to hear the patients. We want to hear what people are willing to pay for in terms of policies after we discovered a cure. So this is one of those cases where I think that coming up with a bad roadmap is the best thing that you can do to start a conversation. You provoke the audience. You go there and say, this is the decision that is getting all the support from all these other experts in that specific area, and then you have the conversation. And I really think that's part of going to the community and eliciting this feedback into the map. I personally believe that infrastructure and tooling play a fundamental role here when we want this more collective elicitation of feedback, because it needs to be super easy to collaborate and to update the roadmap, and it's not at the moment. So this is one of the open questions. I don't know if...
Maybe to connect your point with what Ben was saying before, tacit knowledge, we don't have all the knowledge encoded in text or in publications or in LLMs, by no means. There's a lot of knowledge about how the world works and how systems work in people's heads. And the knowledge that you referred to, I hear you saying that you want to include the lived experience of people that might be affected by any technology. That's kind of one way of saying that. At a much more lower level detail, you may have a very specific tacit knowledge from the scientist on how to do a certain process. So we should have systems that allow us to elicit that tacit knowledge at a much larger scale. We don't have those right now.
It's fine to take really.
Hold on. Maybe we take one last question and we're gonna wrap up.
I'll try to make this fast. We can talk afterwards. One thing that stuck with me was the discussion around road mapping, and you were using the European Union as an example, and that people are funding the position to build the roadmaps for, say, climate change. But if the person who's funding the roadmap to, say, solve climate change is like an Exxon CEO, is there mechanisms in place that allow for the roadmap to be governance controlled, or is some way that can be corrected and shifted from not an institutional or a government level, but actually from a community level that is currently possible?
So, one thing that a good roadmap does is that it states its assumptions and it points you towards where those assumptions are coming from. So you should be able, it should be very self-consistent. And so you should be able to go in and sort of say okay, these assumptions are BS for XYZ, right? And in a magical world, it'd be possible to update those assumptions and propagate it through. Can't really do we don't have the tools to do that right now, but that would be my point.
Okay, I'm getting the time up signal. Just a really quick answer. In practice, one could argue that those roadmaps are taking action the moment you start having grants and calls and all these kind of applications. There are some forums that enable people to discuss and contest those roadmaps, but they are also kind of not transparent and not clear and not open to the broader public. So there's a space for improvement there as well. And this is me wrapping up. There was a lot of more topics to discuss for sure. Let me just drop the idea of science discoverability and roadmaps, and you can, if you are interested, we can chat about that later. But thank you so much, Ben, Eirini, and Joël for being here with me, and thank you for staying until the very end to listen to this very informal conversation. And thank you for all of you that posed really interesting questions.
And thank you all our speakers.